The room is quiet enough to hear the air conditioner click on and off. A conference table, a manila folder placed carefully in the center, its edges squared to the grain of the wood. Michael Jackson doesn't slide it forward. He lets it sit there, unopened. Quincy Jones looks at the folder, then at Michael. According to people who later spoke about that meeting, this is the moment the temperature changed. Not loud, not explosive, just different. The offer inside that folder, private, deliberate, was about to redraw a line between artist and producer, mentor and equal. And once Quincy answered, there was no way back. Weeks earlier, the world around them still ran on familiar rules. Quincy Jones was the architect, the man with the rooms, the budgets, the final say. He had navigated Hollywood studios, network executives, and record labels for decades, often as the only black man in rooms where power was quietly enforced through contracts and credits. Michael Jackson, despite the fame, still entered those rooms as the talent, the voice, the face, the kid who grew up in rehearsal halls and TV studios, now a global star, but still in industry terms managed. Their partnership had already produced miracles. Songs shaped in Westlake recording studios, late nights under fluorescent lights, Quincy at the console, Michael behind the mic, a pair of headphones hanging around his neck. The anchor detail people always return to is the control room glass, Michael watching Quincy through it, waiting for the nod, the raised finger, the one more take. That glass symbolized the order of things, producer outside, artist inside. But something was shifting. Insiders later said Michael had started asking different questions, not about notes or tempos, but about ownership, publishing, pages that credits printed in small type on vinyl sleeves. He began carrying a slim notebook, flipping it open during sessions, jotting things down while Quincy spoke. It wasn't defiance yet, it was preparation. In an industry where black artists had watched their work slip away on paper they didn't control, those questions carried weight. The tension wasn't obvious to outsiders. Publicly, they were still smiling at award shows, still photographed together under stage lights. But behind closed doors, conversations stretched longer. A phone call here, a paused playback there. According to accounts from people present, Michael once asked to replay a track, not to change the sound, but to discuss who would ultimately decide when it was finished. The object anchoring that moment was the tape reel spinning to a stop, the soft slap as it slowed, filling the room with silence. Quincy understood the subtext. He had fought his own battles for respect, had his own scars from rooms where his authority was questioned. He also understood leverage. Michael Jackson was not just a singer anymore. He was a system. Videos, tours, merchandise, global reach. The stakes were no longer just creative, they were structural, control over the future. The private offer didn't come out of nowhere. It was preceded by smaller tests, Michael requesting meetings without managers present, asking for contracts to be sent to his own lawyer first. According to some insiders, he began carrying copies of previous agreements in a leather folder marked with tabs. The anchor detail here is paper, pages that had once been background noise, now becoming the battlefield. The meeting itself was arranged quietly, no entourage, no assistants lingering, a neutral office, not the studio, a place associated with decisions, not creativity. When Michael placed that manila folder on the table, he didn't frame it as rebellion. He framed it as growth. The offer inside, by all reported accounts, was about restructuring their working relationship, shifting authority, redefining who held what power going forward. For Quincy, this wasn't just a business question, it was personal. He had been mentor, gatekeeper, protector in an industry that chewed people up. The folder represented something heavier than a contract. It was a signal that Michael no longer saw himself as a student. The stakes were clear: accept the new terms and risk losing the role that defined their partnership, or refuse and risk losing Michael altogether. Accounts differ on the exact words exchanged. Some say Michael spoke softly, hands folded, eyes steady. Others claim Quincy leaned back, arms crossed, taking his time before responding. What is consistent is the pause, the silence after the offer was made, the way both men reportedly understood that whatever answer came next would change the way they looked at each other forever. The meeting did not end with raised voices, no slammed doors, just a response, measured, firm, and when Quincy finally answered, according to those who later heard about it, Michael nodded once, closed the folder, and stood up, not in anger, in clarity. The relationship they had built was now standing on the edge of something irreversible. The next night, the control room at Westlake was backlit by the familiar glow of the mixing board, the same sliders, the same talkback mic, but the manila folder from that office meeting hovered in the air like a ghost. Quincy Jones sat behind the console, hands resting near the faders, while Michael Jackson stood behind him, eyes fixed on the speakers. According to people present, the playback sounded perfect. That was the problem. There was nothing left to fix, only decisions about who decided. At rehearsal the following afternoon, the shift became visible. Michael arrived with his lawyer, not his usual manager, a subtle but unmistakable signal. The anchor detail was the briefcase set down near a folding chair, leather creasing as it opened. Contracts were inside. Quincy noticed. Others did too. In rooms where hierarchy is enforced by habit, changing who sits where matters. Michael took a seat at the table, not the couch along the wall. Dialogue from that day survives only in fragments, recalled years later. "We need to talk about credits," Michael reportedly said, tapping a page with a pen. Quincy's reply, according to one account, was calm but pointed. "The music comes first." The paper between them made that statement heavier, because on paper, music is money, control, legacy. That morning, a phone call came from the label. An executive asked Quincy whether the project was locked. The anchor detail here is the phone itself, its cord stretched across the desk, pulling slightly as Quincy leaned back. He answered carefully. Creatively, yes. That pause after the comma mattered. It left room for everything else that was suddenly in question. By that evening, word had spread quietly. Not gossip, movement. Engineers sensed it. Assistants adjusted. Michael started giving instructions directly to the room, not waiting for Quincy's cue. Small things, a hand raised to stop a take, a request to hear a specific bar again. Each gesture tied back to that unopened folder and what it represented, a claim to authority. According to some insiders, Quincy pulled Michael aside near the studio hallway, the one with gold records lining the wall. The anchor detail is the plaque reflecting their faces back at them, past success staring into the present. Quincy reminded him of the process, of trust built over years. Michael listened. Then, reportedly, he referenced the meeting. "That's why I put it in writing," he said. The hallway went quiet. The next day, contracts were revised, not finalized, circulated. Pages marked in red, clauses highlighted. The object anchoring this escalation was a legal pad filled with notes in Quincy's handwriting, margins crowded. He was not dismissing the offer, he was measuring it. In his world, answers carried consequences beyond ego. They affected crews, labels, futures. At rehearsal that night, the tension crystallized. Michael stopped a run-through mid-chorus, hand slicing the air. "From the top," he said, already turning back toward the mic. Quincy hesitated, then nodded. The room followed Michael. The shift was subtle, but irreversible. Authority had moved before any formal answer was given.
Later, alone in Quincy's office, he reopened the manila folder. The anchor detail returns. The folder's flap bent slightly now, no longer pristine. Inside were proposed terms that reframed their relationship. Not disrespectful, strategic. Michael wasn't asking to leave, he was asking to lead. For Quincy, the question was whether mentorship could survive parity. That night, Quincy made calls of his own, to trusted peers, to executives who understood power dynamics. The phone became the instrument again, this time carrying his side of the story. "He wants more," he reportedly said. The response on the other end varied, but the message was consistent. Michael Jackson had leverage few artists ever reached. By morning, the answer was forming. Quincy returned to the studio early, standing alone at the console, fingers brushing the same faders he'd used for years. The anchor detail is muscle memory, hands knowing where to go without looking. He understood what saying yes would mean. He also understood what saying no might trigger. The meeting was scheduled for later that day, same office, same table. The manila folder would be there again, opened this time. Michael arrived on time, dressed simply, carrying nothing but himself. The stakes were fully visible now. This wasn't about a song or an album. It was about who would shape the next era. As Quincy sat down, he placed his own folder on the table parallel to Michael's. 2 stacks of paper, 2 visions of control. According to those familiar with the moment, Quincy looked at Michael and spoke without preamble. The room leaned in, metaphorically and literally, waiting for the answer that would detonate everything that came after.
Quincy Jones didn't raise his voice. He didn't slide his folder forward. He spoke, measured and deliberate, laying out his answer to the private offer Michael Jackson had placed on the table days earlier. According to accounts from people close to both men, Quincy declined the restructuring as it had been proposed. He framed it as protection of the process, of the team, of a balance that had made their work historic. The anchor detail is his hand resting flat on the table, palm down, a universal signal of finality. Michael listened without interrupting. When Quincy finished, there was a pause long enough to feel heavy. Then Michael nodded once, not in agreement, but in understanding. He closed the manila folder himself, the soft snap of the clasp punctuating the moment. That sound, more than the words, marked the end of an era. The offer had been made, the answer had been given, and the relationship from that second on was no longer what it had been. The aftermath began almost immediately. The next morning, the studio schedule changed. Michael arrived with a tighter circle, fewer intermediaries. According to insiders, decisions that once flowed through Quincy now came directly from Michael's side. The anchor detail is the call sheet, names rearranged, authority subtly rerouted. Quincy remained involved, but the dynamic had shifted from mentorship to parallel tracks. Within a week, the industry felt it. Label executives adjusted their language, addressing Michael directly on matters once reserved for producers. Contracts reflected a new reality, more oversight, more control concentrated in the artist's hands. This wasn't a rupture played out in public. It was a recalibration, visible only to those who read the fine print and watched who spoke first in meetings. For Quincy, the change was personal as much as professional. He continued to praise Michael's talent publicly, but those close to him noted a new distance. The anchor detail here is absence, fewer late-night sessions, fewer spontaneous calls. The answer he gave in that office had protected his role, but it had also acknowledged something else. Michael no longer needed protection. For Michael, the consequence was clarity. The refusal didn't slow him down, it sharpened him. According to people around him, he became more intentional, more strategic. The manila folder incident became a reference point, a moment he learned that respect in the industry wasn't inherited, it was negotiated. And when negotiation reached its limit, direction had to change. The system responded predictably. Other producers took note. Artists watched closely. The anchor detail is imitation. New contracts modeled on Michael's demands, new conversations about ownership echoing through studios. What had begun as a private offer became a quiet catalyst. Years later, when people asked why their collaboration never quite returned to its original warmth, those familiar with the story pointed back to that room, that table, that folder. Not because of hostility, but because power, once named, can't be unnamed. The relationship survived, but it evolved into something more distant, more formal. The real revelation of that moment wasn't about refusal, it was about recognition. Michael Jackson had reached a point where he could ask for more, and Quincy Jones had reached a point where he could say no and still respect the man asking. The answer changed their relationship because it clarified the truth. They were no longer moving in the same direction, even if they remained part of the same history. The final anchor detail is memory. When the music plays back now, listeners hear perfection. What they don't hear is the quiet click of a folder closing, the sound of two legends acknowledging that a chapter had ended. That was the cost of growth. That was the moment the balance shifted. And once it did, nothing between them could ever be the same again.